Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amsalo. I'm a research fellow at Ca'Foscari University of Venice and Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change. Welcome to today's CMCC at Ca'Foscari seminar, our webinar. The title of today's seminar is Green Buildings Directive, a quantification of its costs and benefits in two Italian regions by Lorenzo Forni and Elena Giarda. Our first speaker is Professor Lorenzo Forni. He is a professor of economic policy at Department of Economics and Business, Marco Fano at the University of Padova. He is also head of Prometeo Association, an Italian think tank providing an economic analysis and forecasting on various economic issues. Professor Forni has previously worked at the International Monetary Fund, IMF, at Washington, D.C., and he was also a researcher at the research department at the Bank of Italia in Rome. He has published several articles in international journals such as the American Economic Review, the Journal of Public Finance, Oxford Economic Papers, as well as numerous book chapters. Most importantly, he is the author of The Magic, Monetary, and Other Economic Tales, which is selected among the best economics books in 2021 by the Financial Times. Professor Forni has got his PhD in economics from Boston University in 2001 and was a visiting scholar at Harvard University between 2005 and 2006. Our second speaker, Dr. Elena Giarda. She is a senior specialist at Prometeo Association. Her areas of expertise are microeconometrics applied to income distribution, poverty, household finance, and tax benefit microsimulation. Her most recent research interests include buildings energy efficiency to evaluate the impact of retrofit costs on households and the price premium on living a more efficient, energy efficient home. Between 1999 and 2000, she has worked as a statistician for the Scottish Government in Edinburgh in the Office of the Chief Economic Advisor. Her work has been published, among others, in the Journal of Banking and Finance, Journal of International Money and Finance, Review of Income and Wealth, and Social Indicator Research. Elena holds a PhD in statistics from the University of Bologna. I welcome both from Professor Forni and Dr. Giarda, sorry for my poor Italian pronunciation, and thanks again for being here and for your commitment and for the interesting topic that you are going to speak today. You have 40 to 45 minutes of presentation and followed by 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A session. We will collect the questions or comments or remarks in the chat box. I encourage all the participants of the webinar to put your comments to them in the chat box. We will collect and finally we will have that discussion in the aftermath of the presentation. So Professor Forni and Dr. Giarda, the floor is yours. We look forward to hearing for your presentation. Thank you.
So thanks, Amsalo. Hi, everybody. Maybe, Elena, you can share the presentation.
Yes.
Amsalo, I was thinking when the introduction and the presentation, starts to get a little longer, you start feeling a little older. And that's the feeling I had when you introduced me, but thank you anyway. Okay, so I hope everybody can see the slides. So today we're going to talk about the Green Buildings Directive that I guess more or less you have heard about, which refers to one of the pieces of the EU legislation, climate legislation, regarding the, making buildings more efficient from an energy and emission perspective. This is a shared work. You see the name under the title, Filippo Fortuna, Elena Giarda, Francesco Giovanardi, Panarello. So this is part of a project finance, just wait a second. Elena, sorry. This is part of a project financed by the European Union under the so-called PNRR program, and is a shared research between myself and Prometeo. So most of the author work at Prometeo, and Prometeo is part of this research network financed by the EU funds. And you see, under the title, all the symbols of this research initiative. Okay, sorry, Elena, please. Okay, so actually, this is explained maybe in more detail. What is this GREENS project, Growing Resilient, Inclusive, and Sustainable Partnership, of which Prometheus Universal are part. I will not spend much time on the green projects, but just to say that it's really focused on sustainability issue. So it covers a wide range of topics, both University of Padua and Prometheus and other universities like Venice are involved on numerous streams of research initiatives. But today, Elena, please, next slide. Today we'll focus on our work, on our work on the work of this paper, and this is, the outline. So it's quite a long, so I will try to breeze through it because for the first part, then Elena will take over. So briefly, this is the outline, background, the research objective, motivation, data, and so on and so forth. Please, Elena, next slide. Okay, so it's well known that, especially in Europe, building are a large source of emissions. In 2021, 42% of emission and energy consumption in the EU was, by buildings. And no surprise, the European Commission adopted various legislative initiatives, in order to reduce emissions in building and to improve the energy performance. So to make a long story brief, basically there was a green building directive proposed. It was not a proposal, it was a draft in March 2023, which basically used the so-called EPC, energy performance certificates, as a benchmark to assess the improvement of energy efficiency in the buildings. Basically was requiring most of the lower levels of this of the buildings assessed by these EPC certificates to be moved up through renovation and retrofitting of the buildings. We'll get there. And then in December, actually, the final version that was approved was a little bit less strict because, some countries complained that it was very difficult to retrofit, especially, historical building, very old building, the one that were in the lowest categories of the certificates. And therefore was decided to focus more on primary energies savings from buildings. And in the last bullet, you see what was basically decided. So to reduce the average primary energy use of residential building by 16% by 2030 and by 22% by 2035. So there's been a shift basically in the criteria. The final version of the directive specified the target in terms of energy saving and not in terms of moving up, the building from lower energy performance certificates to higher level of energy performance certificates. Now, we are actually working on using the EPC certificates. And we find that basically the way we assess the cost and benefits of the directive are more or less in line with the target of the latest version of the directive, which is the energy saving by around 20% eventually, or by 2035. So next slide. So next slide, Elena, please. The goal of the paper is to, first of all, let me say that this is a first draft. We are still working on a number of assumptions that we have used to make this calculation. But the basic idea is to try to assess the costs and the benefits from this directive. The costs are obviously monetary costs in terms of the investment to improve the energy efficiency of building, and the benefits are mainly in terms of reduced energy consumption and reduced emissions, in particular CO2 emissions. As I was saying, we use the energy performance certificates, and we focus on two Italian regions, Lombardy and Piedmont, or Piemonte, because we have the data, the certificates for these two regions. We're trying to extend the sample to other regions, but it's not that obvious to get this data for confidentiality reason. And we know there's discussion about how informative these certificates are in terms of certain parameters contained. I mean, there's a lot of information in this in the energy performance certificate. Usually, these are prepared by a trained appraisal that uses software. So there's a lot of knowledge that goes into those certificates. Sorry? Yeah. Okay. There's a lot of knowledge that goes into those certificates, and so we still think that there is a lot of information that is useful. And in particular, there are recommendations that the appraisals make in order to assess what measures should be. You can go to the next slide. What measures should be introduced to improve the energy efficiency of the building and to move from one category to another one. Now, in Italy, you know that the issue of subsidies for energy, to improve the energy efficiency of building has been a very contentious and it's kind of a long history. Started with the Ecobonus in 2017 and went all the way up to more recently with the super bonus 110. Now, so there is behind this, the question of how much these retrofits, these investments should be subsidized by the government, and so far the Italian experience on this has been at least on the. I mean, you have been following all the issue of how much the super bond has been costing, and I mean 150 billion is just one number, but probably in the last 3 years since 2020 is even higher. So it's a huge. It's huge. We are talking about 7-8% of GDP. It's a huge amount of money that has been spent. We are not assessing, what has happened because of lack of data. For example, Enea doesn't provide publicly the data for the bonuses at the micro level, so which buildings receive subsidies and so on and so forth. So we don't have, let's say, the tax side of the data, so we cannot really study how the incentives have what has been the effect of incentives in terms of increasing these investments, which actually would be, we are still trying to get the data, and I think would be a pretty interesting research line. But what we do here is more looking forward and saying, okay, we have these targets in terms of energy savings from buildings, and we go basically and try to assess cost and benefits looking forward. Elena, please, next slide. Now, so we use this the energy performance certificates. We have two regions, the Lombardy and Piedmont, data from 2015 to 2022 for Lombardy and up to 2023 for Piedmont. We focus on residential buildings, so we live outside, commercial building. And after cleaning the data, we have about 1,200,000 observations for Lombardy and almost 500,000 for Piedmont. As you see, this is about 20%, a little bit less for Piedmont, of the total residential unit in the two regions. Now, next slide, please. Now, I guess I don't have to spend much time on what actually it's included in terms of information in the energy performance certificates. Let me remind you that G is you'll hear a lot about G, F, and E categories. The G is the lowest one, and of course F is the next to the lowest one, and then you go all the way up to A4, where basically in each certificate there is a lot of information. You see in the slide, location, and also the construction here and other information. One important focus is this retrofit recommendation, and which is the information, one of the information that we use to assess which interventions, which investments should be done to improve, the level of the so to move basically to one level of the certificate, like for example from G to F or to F to E. Please, next slide. Now, this is basically the classification of the energy performance certificates. It goes from G, which is the lowest one, to A4, and basically this is based on the use that one specific building or house use of energy would make with respect to a benchmark, which is the class A1. But the certificates still have the information on the energy use. So it's not that we have technically, to use this classification G, F, E, but we have also information exactly on the energy use of the building. Now, as you see in the last bullet, the energy performance of a building depends on how well it performs compared to a reference one, and the reference one is the A1, the class A1. Okay, this is we might come back to this, but let's move on for the time being, given time constraints. Now, this is a few. I will present a few descriptive statistics before Elena takes over, getting to more the technical analysis. So this is basically the reason why a building or a house has a certificate. Not all, as I said at the beginning, about 20. We have about 20% of the buildings have a certificate, and the reason is that you have to file or fill one, especially if you sell the house or if you rent the house or if you do a renovation without selling or renting, and you apply for subsidies, for example, for the super bonus. And so this is the distribution of the reason. Most of the EPC are made to sell or the house, but you see the second reason is for rental. Next slide, please. And this is the distribution of the energy class by municipality. You see the legend in the upper left of each figure for the regions. These are the two regions, and you see that D is the light orange all the way to G, which should be the dark red. And you see more or less how is the distribution. And you see that a lot of those buildings are really in the lower categories, G, F, and really a few are in, for example, a few. I mean, these are actually, averaged by municipality. So I shouldn't talk about buildings, but about averages. As you see in the ballots, the average EPC in Lombardy belongs overwhelmingly to class F, 77%, and to class G, about 20%. And Piedmont is not very different. Class F is about 60% of the municipality, and class G, about 26%. So this is to say that, please, next slide, that a lot of those buildings are really in lower class category. So let me speed up. This is by year on construction. So you see, for example, that building built before 1946, which would be the bar at the left of each chart for both Lombardy and Piedmont. Most of those buildings are in the G class, or the lower efficiency class. And as you move, to later years, for example, after 2006, you see that you already have a number of A building and the G building. G building, I mean building with a certificate at the G level are really less. And of course, there are building codes these days that prevent, from building very low, no, please, next slide, from very low efficiency building. Let me conclude with the recommendation, which is the information we use. As I said, these are the recommendations made by the technicians or the appraisals that prepare the certificates. And basically, there are 6 types of recommendations, which is so-called opaque building envelopes, which would, basically how to insulate the walls. Let me explain it like this. Then the second is the transparent building envelope, which has to do with windows, basically. Climate control system. Winter, this is the heating system. Climate control system. Summer would be the air conditioning system. And these are the 4 we focus, because these are the ones that are most recommended. Then there is a 5th and a 6th, which the 6th, for example, is related to renewable energy. But this is really recommended very rarely. Elena, I'll pass over to you to explain how we use this recommendation to assess the cost of improving the energy efficiency of building, and also the benefits. Please, Elena.
Okay, thank you, Lorenzo. Yes, I'll take from here. And okay, I just want to say that these recommendations, are the main variable that we are going to employ in our analysis together with the energy class. As a matter of fact, the energy appraiser gives suggestions, recommendations on which retrofit to implement in order to switch, to make an energy class switch, to upgrade from a lower class to a higher class. As Lorenzo said, we concentrate on these 4 recommendations, which are the most often recommended ones, suggested ones. And so we have these recommendations for each of the dwellings contained in the 2 data sets. And what we want to do is to assign a cost to each of these recommendations. So where do we get, let me just say, okay, where do we get the costs from? We looked at the legislative decree of February 2022 that provided the maximum amounts of unitary expenditure allowed for renovation works under the super bonus and eco bonus schemes. So you see from this column here some unitary prices, and the prices for the opaque building envelope and for the transparent building envelope are euros per square meter. So we need to retrieve the surface of both the opaque building envelope and of the transparent building envelope, and I'll explain you in the next slide how we do that. Instead, for the climate control system, both for winter and summer, we have a price per kilowatt thermal hours. However, these costs only cover the cost of materials. So they do not include, as I say here in this slide, they do not include labor costs, installation costs, and taxes. So what we need to do is to get an overall cost of the retrofits. To do that, we look at the National Institute of Statistics input-output tables for the construction sector, from which we retrieve two items: the output at basic prices, which is the intermediate value of production, and total supply at purchases prices, which is the final value of production. We take the ratio between these two values and we get a coefficient of 1.57. And we apply this coefficient to these amounts, to these unitary amounts, to get these increased amounts. So I hope this is clear. So these total amounts include both the cost of materials, the installation costs, labor costs, and VAT and taxes. And so this is an assumption we made to go from the material to the cost, which reflects only the materials employed, to include also the other components of the cost. And another assumption, another hypothesis that we made has to do with how we distinguish between the opaque and transparent envelope surfaces, which are not provided in the data set. We only have the overall outer surface of a dwelling. So we look at the building regulations of the city of Milan and Turin, and we take the minimum transparent surface that a property must have as a percentage of the overall envelope surface, which are 10% for the city of Milan and 8% for the city of Turin. We apply these two percentages to the overall surface, so to get the transparent envelope surface, and by difference with the total surface, we get the opaque surface. Then we also have to make an assumption on which type of appliance is used for the winter control system and for the summer climate control system. That is the heater and the heater for heating up the dwelling, and the heat pump for air conditioning. So by talking with an energy appraiser, he told us that the average power of a heater is 20 kilowatt thermal hours, whereas the average power of a heat pump has an average power of 5 kilowatt thermal hours. So we apply these figures to the unitary cost of the table. So 306 euros per square meter for the opaque building envelope, for instance, and 1,130 euros per kilowatt thermal hours for air conditioning. So these are the assumptions behind our figures. Then we perform a clusterization of our data. Since we have a huge variability within the data, so we split the data into clusters, into 672 clusters, by looking at the following variables. The heated surface split into quartiles. So the heated surface is the size of the dwelling, basically. Then the construction year grouped into 6 classes, whether the dwelling is a flat or a detached or semi-detached house. So we have a binary variable. The climate zone in which the dwelling is located. We have only 2 climate zones in these 2 regions, that is zone E and zone F, the coldest ones, and the energy performance grouped into 7 classes from G to A, where A is the grouping of classes from A4 to A1. So overall, we have 672 clusters. Moreover, because for each property, the appraiser may provide more than one recommendation, each of which would allow the property to upgrade its energy performance class, we take the recommendation that allows the housing unit to get to the desired class with the lowest associated cost. So we want to avoid double counting. Okay, and so I hope everything is clear. And so for each of these clusters, we compute the median cost. Okay, so we have median cost for each of the clusters. And then we take the weighted mean of this median cost by cluster by weighting with the cluster numerosity. And so these are the costs, the estimated costs per dwelling that we get for upgrading from class G to class E in the 2 regions, and then from class F to class E, and then further from class E to at least class D. So we see that the average, these are in euros. So for Lombardy, the average cost to switch from class G to class E is around 55,000 euros, whereas in Piedmont is 52. From class F to class E, we have a lower cost as expected, okay, because we are starting from a more efficient class F, which is more efficient than G. So we have an average cost of 30,000 euros compared to in Lombardy, compared to 27,000 euros for Piedmont. And then from class E to at least class D, we have an average cost of around 31,000 euros for Lombardy and 30,000 euros for Piedmont. However, these costs refer only to the dwellings included in the data sets. And we saw that the data sets don't cover the whole of the housing stock, but they are roughly the 20% of the overall housing stock of the 2 regions. So we need to retrieve the cost for all the dwellings. And so to do that, we need to impute a cost to the housing units not included in the EPC datasets that are those for which an EPC is not available. And so to do that, we look at the census data the population and housing census data, and we refer to the year 2011. Why do we take year 2011? Because we want to exclude buildings in Class A, which do not need any retrofits, okay, because they are already in the highest class. So let me see. So hold on a second. Yes, so what we do, we compute the relative frequency of housing units in classes G and F from our data by excluding newly built buildings, the A-class buildings, and assign this percentage to the 2011 census data. The 2011 census data, by definition, does not include the new buildings that we observe in our data, which refer to 2015-2023. So the 2011 data of the census do not include the newly built buildings that we observe in our data, which refer to more recent years. And so what we get are 1.8 million dwellings in Class G in Lombardy and 1.2 million in Class F. For Lombardy, again, whereas for Piedmont, we obtain roughly 1.2 million dwellings in both classes. Then we have to go from, we have to compute the number of dwellings which are going to switch from Class E to D. And these are those that were in Class G and F and have switched to Class E, okay, and then those those who were already in Class E and have to switch to Class D. So again, we take the percentages in our APC data and apply them to the census data. So overall, we get 3.8 million dwellings in Lombardy and 1.2 million dwellings in Piedmont. And to these dwellings, we assign the unitary cost that we computed and which I showed you in table 2. Okay, these are the costs that we computed based on the APC data. Okay. Okay. Sorry. Okay. So the overall cost that we estimate is huge, and but we are still working on it. So we get a total cost of 254 billion euros for Lombardy and 107 billion euros for Piedmont, for a total cost of 362 billion to bring all residential dwellings in the two regions from Class G and F to E, and then from E to at least D. Okay. Then we move to the estimated benefits. So what do we mean by benefits? We mean reduction in CO2 emissions and gains from lower electricity and gas expenditure. We compute the benefits for the same dwellings for which we have computed the retrofit costs. Okay. So we, to this end, we look at the CO2 emissions, kilograms per year, and consumption of gas, cubic meters per year, and electricity, kilowatt hours per year, associated to the buildings in the data set. A caveat here is in place because we don't have actual consumption, but we have theoretical consumption within the data set. And this theoretical consumption is the theoretical level of gas and electricity necessary to keep a temperature of 18 degrees Celsius in the dwelling. So we go back to the clustering that we built previously for the costs. And instead of using all the variables, we skip the energy performance class, and so we build 96 clusters based on the surface, construction year, the type of dwelling, and the climate zone. Okay, so instead of having 672 clusters, we have now 96 clusters, and each cluster, you have to look at each cluster as an average building with certain characteristics. So we have an average, the same average building for each energy class. Okay, so that we can compare the energy class of a certain building, let's say a semi-detached house built in 1993 in zone F, etc., with a certain surface. We look at the median value of consumption of gas and electricity, or the emissions. So let's talk about emissions, and then we look at the corresponding emissions of the same type of dwelling in class E, for instance. And so where we look at how much that average dwelling consumes in class G, and how much emits, and how much are the emission, how big are the emissions in of the same dwellings in class E. I hope I'm making myself clear. So we are comparing emissions and consumption of the same dwelling, of a same dwelling in different energy classes, and so then we take the difference between these median values. So we compare this semi-detached house in zone F built in 1993 in class G. We look at its emissions. So we take the difference with the emissions of the same type of dwelling in class E. And so these are the changes in emissions, and we do the same for consumption of electricity and the consumption of gas. The resulting unitary benefits are presented in this table, and we have these are reductions. Okay, so CO2 emissions reduce, these are kilos per year. Then we have electricity consumption. You observe here a negative value for Lombardy in electricity consumption, which means a rise in electricity consumption. I'll comment on that in the next slide. We observe reduction in consumption, and we computed the overall monetary savings here in the last two rows of the table by applying the gas and electricity prices that we retrieve from the Italian Regulatory Authority for Energy Networks and Environment, ARERA. Okay, so these are euros per year. Okay, as we did for the costs, again, we impute this cost to the whole of the housing stock by employing the same figures that we computed for imputing the costs to the building units, to the housing units not included in our data set. So what we obtain is a reduction in the CO2 emissions of 11,300 kilotons per year. We get a higher consumption of electricity, a negative benefit, okay? We obtain a lower consumption of gas and a total of monetary savings of 5.5 billion euros. Okay, so I made a quick computation because these are yearly savings. Okay, so since we computed the costs to switch from class G and F to E and then at least to D, those targets have to be achieved by 2030. The switch from class G and F to class E by 2030, and then to at least the class D by 2033. I computed an overall cost, benefit, which amounts to 21.4 billion up to 2030, and then another 5.8 billion up to 2033. So an overall saving of 27.2 billion euros, which is far below the costs, but at least we have the same framework for the two measures, the costs and the benefits. So another factor to take into account is the higher value that buildings can obtain by actually implementing the retrofits. There is evidence in the literature, and we are also working on that to retrieve, to estimate a price premium from making your own dwelling more energy efficient. So some of the benefits will also come from increased values due to the fact that a dwelling is more energy efficient. So we haven't included this computation here in this work, but we can take account of that as well. I think this is everything on my part, and I now hand the floor back to Lorenzo for some policy implications and for some wrap up. Please, Lorenzo. You're muted, Lorenzo.
Oh, sorry, here I am, sorry. So I was saying, thank you, Elena. So this has been a lot of number crunching, and there are a lot of assumptions. And the question is, okay, what do we get out of this? First of all, we feel that our estimates of the cost are probably kind of an upper bound for a number of reasons compared to the latest version of the directive. First, because we achieved the energy saving mainly from let's say improving theoretically, the energy efficiency of the G EPCs, so of the less efficient buildings, while that has not to be the case. Second, because we apply prices to these different retrofit interventions, these different investments, which are probably a little, high because they were benefiting from a lot of incentives. But overall, I think the main message remains, even if we are going to do, in the future, some robustness exercise, that the cost is apparently overwhelmingly higher than the benefit in terms of energy savings and emission savings. Now, I want to make a point clear that Elena referred to the possibility of an increase in the price of the dwelling, but that increase in the price should capitalize should be equal theoretically to the saving in energy consumption that the investment is able to achieve going forward. So those two things shouldn't be, substantially different. And so I think we are capturing, when we think about the energy savings, what is the return from the investment in improving the energy efficiency of the building. Now, here there are two benefits, as the slide says, private and social. Obviously, private is the saving in terms of energy bill, social is the reduction in the externality in emissions. And so what is the social benefit? We use a price for CO2 emission, which is a pretty high price, which is the social cost, the social cost of carbon of the German environmental agents, €800 per ton of CO2. We know that in the European emission trading system, the current price is lower, but it might not reflect, what is the overall social cost of carbon. Anyway, we use this quite high estimate. I mean, I'm not sure it's high. I mean, it's just one estimate. And so we basically assume there is an investment made upfront at time zero, and then there are accumulated benefits over time. So we use the discounted sum of yearly benefit from time zero to time t, and I'll show you a graph with a discount rate of 1%. And then we think, please, in the next slide, because the figure I think is more clear. So this is the figure. You see the blue line is an assumed cost of retrofitting the building, about €55,000. And then you have the orange line is the private benefit. So basically is the cumulative discounted value of all the energy bill savings over time from year 1 to year 101. And you see that if you so the break-even point is really at the end of the period. So the saving in terms of energy bill are so low compared to the initial cost that it takes really a long time to break even on the investment. But if you include the social benefits, which is the green line, the gray line, you see that only the social benefit would imply a break-even year of about 49.50, which is pretty long. But if you sum the private and social benefit, which is the yellow line, then you have a break-even year about 20 years. So what we are saying is that true, there is an upfront cost which is relevant, this €55,000 in the example. True, the private benefits are relatively low, but maybe the social benefits are pretty high, and so you can think in this first run of the estimate that the break-even year is about 20 years. Now we also get another insight from this simple analysis, which is what is the share of the private benefits compared to the total benefits, so including also the social benefit in terms of CO2 emission reduction. So from this analysis, we get a sense that about 1/3 is private benefit and 2/3 is social benefits. And so in terms of policy prescriptions, we should basically out of a cost of 100, the private agents would be willing to pay about 1/3, and so the government should subsidize the other 2/3
in order to achieve the social optimal level of investment. And so this is a little, you know, I wouldn't call it theoretical insight, but a little economic insight from this analysis on how to be refined, of course, on how to think about which share the government should subsidize of this investment in retrofitting, you know, dwellings and buildings. And you know, there has been all this debate about the 110% bonus, which is obviously outrageously high. And we think probably the bonus should be in the 60-70% range, which is actually where is you know, the law in Italy is moving now. I think I'll stop here for time constraints and open up for any question and follow up. Thank you, Amsalo, and thank you.